Politics, Mando Style. RK equals. Part 3. Senate Chambers. Senate Building. Coruscant. My friends, it's good to see you all here once again. Palpatine smiled from atop of the Chancellor's personal platform. His eyes swept through the rebuilt Senate chamber and lowered as they passed over booths filled up by fresh blood. The attack on the Senate had hit his power base particularly hard, however it had culled the 1,500 neutral systems alliance put in place by Amidala and her closest supporters. With his home-world senator out of the way for the time being, Palpatine found it much easier to push forward his agenda. The fact that the surviving senators were scared helped a lot too, he had to admit that. Who knew that the attacks that scattered his plan to the winds would prove actually useful in many aspects? Palpatine schooled his expression into a grim mask. With everything that has happened, it's hard to believe that the war has gone for a year. We, the Republic and her people, had been dealt many low blows since the Separatists unveiled their true colors, those of merciless terrorists. Sidious paused for a moment. His expression shifted into one of a grim determination and he started radiating confidence. They thought that attacking Coruscant, the heart of the Republic itself with biological weapons would break us. That striking this very building and murdering scores of senators whose only crime was to doing their duty for the betterment of us all would terrify us into surrender. My friends, they were mistaken. Palpatine raised his voice to a shout in order to be heard over the applause from the attending senators. There are many questions that need answering. How did we get here? What are we going to do now? How are we going to win this war? I'm here to answer them all. Sidious made a placating gesture and smiled. Feeling the near adulation of the people present in the chambers was close to intoxicating. Almost as good as feeling fear and misery. In the wake of the latest enemy attacks, there were those who called for surrender. Those who believed that we were losing the war. Palpatine paused for a dramatic effect. The latter group was right, he stated grimly and lowered his head. The Sith Lord had to struggle not to smile. The cries of protest and fear that followed his declaration were delicious and just as planned. Peace, my friends. I promised you all answers and I'm here to deliver. Palpatine raised a hand and waited for the cacophony to subdue. He had their undivided attention. Until our armed forces' decisive victories over Ryloth and Geonosis, we were losing. That much is true, a fact that none of us can afford to disregard. We were pushed back on all fronts and the sectors we held, they were protected at the price of rivers of blood. Smile tugged the corners of Palpatine's mouth as he reveled at the rapt attention of the crowd. That's no longer the case. For the first time since the Separatists began this conflict we aren't under the immediate threat of destruction. Our Grand Army was finally able to stalemate the enemy on all fronts. This time there were a few relieved cheers and shouts. However, that's far from enough. Now that we know the true face of the enemy, that of oppression, slavery and murder, we can't do anything less but push for total defeat of the evil cabal that is the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Sidious smiled as the majority of senators started applauding. In order to achieve victory and never again be at the non-existent mercy of our enemies, the brave men and women in our armed forces need our help. They need more ships, vehicles, weapons and recruits in order to grant us victory. To guarantee that no more atrocities like Ryloth, Naboo and Coruscant happen. To achieve that, my advisors, our best generals and myself had crafted a bill that is vital for the further prosecution of this war. It requires the further expansions of our clone army, making the Kaminoans and their lobby happy, increasing production in all our major shipyards and increasing their capacity, something that the senator from Kuat and the other major industrial centers would simply love, and providing our soldiers with the best possible equipment in more than enough quantity to win. The various military contractors would be ecstatic at that too. This time almost everyone was either cheering loud or applauding. Palpatine took a note of those who weren't. All but a few were the surviving members of Amidala's little club, but there were a handful of new senators as well. Finally, but most importantly, it's time for us all to raise to the challenge of protecting our homes. All the best weapons and ships in the galaxy will be useless if there aren't brave beings ready to man them and face the evil that the Gar is fighting as we speak. We, the Republic, are the greatest nation this galaxy has ever seen. It's time for us to step up and prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Sidious paused for a moment and took a deep breath. He could feel it. The senators would support the next round of bills and reforms, witlessly expand his power base and bring their precious republic a step closer to becoming his empire. When all was said and done, he was poised to emerge from the latest round of cluster-criffing disasters in a much better position he would have held otherwise. The only problem would be the Jedi. An army which wasn't mostly made up from clones would hesitate when the time to dispose of them came. However, even in that regard, all was not lost. The Jedi, their council in particular, were doing a great job of destroying their public support and credibility. Sidious was going to help them along once the Skywalker trial started. Part 4. CIC, Republic Cruiser Chimera. 5 light seconds from Mandalore. We reverted to real space with barely a shudder. Moments later, the rest of the battle group materialized around us and maneuvered to create an armored glove around the flagship. A few seconds later, the tactical plot refreshed and displayed the surrounding space. There were a lot of ships. Cis ships. Separatists' fleet elements detected. Designating hostile 1. The tactical officer announced aloud. A cluster of dots between Mandalore and its moon Concordia shifted from the grey of unknown to the deep red reserved for hostiles. Other dots were changing color too, some in clusters, other by themselves. There were 3 cruiser battle groups in blue, the Mandalorian Defense Fleet units we could detect. Sir, one of those flotillas shows Death Watch IFF. The sensor officer declared. Designate them as potential hostiles. Give me better resolution on those cis ships. One of the blue groups, that above Concordia, shifted into amber. 1 battleship. 1 command frigate, 12 standard munificence. Tactical announced. That's 31 potentially friendly Mando cruisers, 9 hostile, and the Separatists, Palian stated. That we can detect anyway. Unless all of our hosts turn on us or the Cis drops another fleet, we should be all right. You have a trick or two up your sleeve, right? The Commodore looked at me. Of course. I'm not seeing any battle stations. Only a ring of defense satellites. The Mandalorians never rebuild them after their civil war. Sloppy, unless they lacked the resources? I thought aloud. Pacifists. At least they tried very hard to appear as such. Helena shrugged. That wasn't a trick. Obi-Wan snapped. No need to defend your girlfriend yet. Commodore, hail our hosts. No matter what they demand, don't let them box in our ships while we're planetside. Not happening, sir. There are a lot of the bastards, but nothing that would relish facing 5 of our cruisers. Good. We aren't here to play games. RK Sundari. Mandalore. The capital wasn't anything like I remember. In fact, the whole desert in which the biome city was situated was a forest the last time I was here. At least it was more or less in the same place, though the semi-sphere of grey metal encompassing the metropolis was a far cry from the sprawling skyscrapers and suburbs I remembered. Apparently the Mandalorians had managed to trash the place while I was in a timeout. When the assault shuttle that brought us down landed, we were met by a pair of honor guards in blue ceremonial armors. They were armed with force pikes and nothing else. I hoped for their sakes that their garb was made of skin. Our greeting committee didn't bode well for the negotiations. Sending just those 2 to meet us was a slight, a show of disrespect that would have pissed off most senators. That's not the proper way to meet a diplomatic party, which is here to discuss an alliance. Helena muttered. Oh, it is if the party is representing the Republic. I quipped. During the Cold War, the Republic did try to sunder our alliance with the Mandalorians. While that didn't work too well for them, it was amusing to watch how much fun the locals had in subtly snubbing the diplomatic parties, especially if there were Jedi present. You expected something like this? Kenobi glanced at me. Yep. It tells us that the Duchess is in even weaker position than we were led to believe. Unless you pissed her off the last time you were together and this is for your benefit? I asked. We separated on amicable terms. Obi-Wan glared at me. This way. One of the honor guards waved towards a pair of speeders, which were more cargo platforms than anything else. Let's hope that there aren't snipers waiting for us. RK. We spent our flight through the city in silence. I was busy observing the place. As cities go, it was a nice one. Tasteful buildings, a lot of hydroponic farms and parks. More importantly, the place was chock full with statues and murals depicting the good old warrior days. So much for the new Mandalorians speaking about the majority of the locals. If they really were all pacifists, the works of art we could see wouldn't be glorifying the warrior ways of their ancestors. Most telling was the fact that from the dozens of statues we saw, not a single one was what you could call a peaceful one even if you squinted very hard. That was good. I would have been sorely disappointed to find out that the Civil War had castrated the Mandalorians and turned them all into pacifists. The government building we arrived at was a beautiful work of art, a breathtaking amalgamation of crystal and metal, lined up with statues. It was also a security nightmare. A single man met us at the landing pad. He was about 190, short blonde hair and a bit of beard under his chin. Long face, hawkish nose and piercing purple eyes. General Vale, General Kenobi. It's good to see you. I'm Prime Minister Alamek. Please follow me. The Duchess is expecting you. Minister. I nodded. Have your separatist guest made you an offer you can't refuse yet? That's something you need to discuss with Duchess Satine. Oh, we will. We were supposed to meet the Republic ambassador here. She hasn't arrived yet. The Duchess requests your presence immediately. I shrugged and waved him to lead. This wasn't smelling like a trap. Yet. A few minutes later we were led into a large audience chamber. The Duchess was waiting for us on an ornamental throne at the far end. The only other person present was an unassuming man in dark purple robes. I raised an eyebrow at her. Satine Kryze looked nothing like her sister. She wore a deep blue and green dress. An ornamental headdress covered most of her head and forehead. Her blonde hair was bound by 6 strange things on each side of her head. She looked rather down too, at least until she saw Obi-Wan. That apparently perked her up and she stood up to greet us. I looked around. No sight of guards. Just the Duchess, her Prime Minister and a man I assumed to be an advisor. This was going to be an interesting meeting. Politics, Mando style. =RK equals. Part 5. Audience Chamber. Sundari Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. For a few moments I actually considered being unusually diplomatic, but the eye decided to cut to the chase. In the end, unless Satine decided to change her policies to 180 degrees, she wasn't the person I really needed to talk to. Curious. All the briefings about the situation on Mandalore I got didn't mention that your government is this desperate. I smiled at the Duchess. I earned myself a lot of glares too, from practically everyone but Helena, who simply rolled her eyes at my antics. What makes you think that we're desperate? Satine asked. I waved at the empty chamber around us. This isn't an official meeting. I hope so anyway. If this is all the support you have, I'm obviously talking with the wrong person. It's unofficial. The Prime Minister stated quietly. With whom would you talk if not us? The Death Watch are supporting an alliance with the Sis. You on the other hand wish to remain neutral. Am I right? Of course. This isn't our war, Satine stated. Too bad. That's not an option. I smiled at her. What? Kenobi turned to face me. A Mandalorian neutrality is unacceptable for either side. Perhaps I shouldn't telling you that. I smiled at the Duchess. I'm to either ensure an alliance or remove the Mandalorians as players in this conflict. Sorry, Obi-Wan. That was need to know until we arrived. I shrugged. That's madness. The Republic would never condone. The Duchess spluttered. Please. You can't be that naive. The Republic was ecstatic when you disarmed after your civil war. Helena added. Now that you might rearm and become a threat again. I shrugged. A lot of senators remember on whose side Mandalore historically fought. The way we were sent here. It's obvious that there are parties that want an alliance between us to fail so you could be dealt with once and for all. Now let's not waste each other's time, Duchess. Let's talk real politic. Excuse us for a moment. Kenobi smiled at Satine, grabbed my hand and pulled me away. Vale, he hissed. What's your major malfunction? The Jedi glared at me. Did I fail to mention my precise instructions? It had something to do with who your girlfriend is. Divided loyalties and all that. I nodded at the Duchess who was busy whispering with her advisors. I'm not compromised. You on the other hand are insane. Am I? I just cut to the chase. I don't know about you, but I don't have weeks or months to waste in negotiations that are likely useless. This whole thing, it shows that Satine is desperate. Not good for our position. So we're going with Plan B. What's that particular piece of insanity? Throw the new Mandalorians under the Airbus and make a deal with a faction that actually has backing and will support us in the war. If your girl plays her hand well, she might retain some power too. That's not why we're here. Please enlighten me. I'm just a poor old Sith. I gave him a deadpan look. Demented too. We're here to support the Mandalorian government and ensure an alliance with them. Obi-Wan glared at me. No. We're here to ally ourselves with a military power or make sure that Mandalore can't become a threat for the Republic in the future. That by itself tanks all that the new Mandalorians and your girlfriend stand for. Their platform is pacifism. Anything but continued neutrality isn't an acceptable alternative for them. For you that's a bad thing. Criffing Sith. Kenobi growled. Not my idea, though I agree. Mandalore has to choose side or face a civil war. In either case, their vaulted neutrality is over. That's not what the Republic stands for. It is now. The Separatists hit too close to home with their attacks on Naboo and Coruscant. This is no longer a war fought in the nebulous Outer Rim. It's a problem for the core, and that will show to everyone the true face of the Republic. You don't really believe in it, do you? The Republic, democracy? They're useful tools and I will support them until they fail. I smiled. I was telling the truth. From my point of view. I can't let Mandalore be consumed by this war. Obi-Wan's shoulders slumped. Do you have a miracle ready? There are many things arrayed against us. To the average Mandalorian, we, the Republic and the Jedi, are the enemy. Me being a Sith is a mixed blessing at best, and my alliance with you will be working against me. I'm a Jedi. In the end I will do what I believe to be right. Obi-Wan glared at me. I don't expect anything less, my friend. I smiled. So I implore you, talk some sense in your girlfriend once we know what exactly we're dealing with. You're going to seek favor from either the Death Watch or another militaristic organization. As of the battle for Ryloth, the Death Watch was a bunch of thugs with just a few decent people in the ranks. They had obviously expanded their influence and membership. Massively so, in fact. That bounty hunter friend of yours. Obi-Wan narrowed his eyes. Yeah. Bo-Katan. Kryz, I chuckled and watched his eyes widen. I have a few surprises ready. However, bearing a miracle, Mandalore will be a battlefield before we're done here. Take care for your girlfriend. Let's see what our esteemed Duchess wants from us. == Part 6. Audience Chamber. Sundari Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Duchess. You wanted to talk? Please do so. I waved at Satine. The Mandalorian woman glared at me for a long moment, then turned to Obi-Wan. Master Kenobi, I want to formally request the aid of the Jedi Order in maintaining Mandalore's neutrality in this conflict. I smiled. That was the only real card the new Mandalorians had to play unless they threw all they believed in away and chose a side. That's a strike too, Obi-Wan. I watched the man squirm. Will there be a third way you're going to be compromised today? First, she's your girlfriend, I stated aloud, making the Prime Minister and advisor gasp, while Kenobi glared at me. The Duchess was simply speechless at my accusation. That was definitely something that you didn't do at even an informal diplomatic meeting. It was too bad for everybody that I didn't have time to follow the usual rules of diplomacy. Second, you just got placed in a position where your duties as a Jedi and a Republic general are at odds. Vale, just shut up for a moment. Kenobi growled and looked at the Duchess. As a Jedi Master, I'm a peacekeeper. And a guardian of the Republic, of civilization. My duty is to preserve peace. He gave me a particularly dirty look. However, Duchess Satine, my colleague who apparently had never heard about diplomacy, is correct. Unless there has been new and positive developments here on Mandalore, I don't see a way you can possibly maintain your neutrality. We've seen the true colors of the Separatists. They and any organization backing them won't accept an alliance between our two states. They won't respect your neutrality either. We have the Death Watch firmly in hand, the Prime Minister stated. He sounded confident too. A few months ago, that was the case. I nodded. After Ryloth they started getting droves of new recruits and a lot of popular support. I smiled. I did receive a few messages from Bo-Katan detailing the Death Watch situation, though I mentioned them to no one. That's an exaggeration at best. This was advisor So most of your people aren't chafing under the forced veneer of pacifism that your ruling party had been pushing down our throats ever since the Civil War? You're honestly wanting me to believe that their warrior blood isn't boiling at the thought of joining in the greatest war in 1,000 years? I smiled. Of course not. We're enlightened, more mature people now. We all saw what war and the warrior ways brought us. Our warrior ways are just that, a relic of the past, Satine snapped. I was astounded. You actually believe that? I muttered. Of course I do. Satine glared at me. You're no Mandalorian, I snapped back. How the hell did this woman rose to power on Mandalore? I would never know. If you mean that I'm not a mad woman hell-bent on conquering the galaxy and drowning it in blood after waging a senseless war, that's true. I'm proud of it. At least she was a fierce little thing, even if she was an idealistic idiot. If she ever met Padme, those two would be best friends forever or something. That's something to be proud of. Kenobi nodded. In different situation it would be commendable. Helena added. Here and now? The agent shrugged. Even if Obi-Wan decides to throw away his commission as a Republic general and help you try achieving neutrality, it won't help neither you nor your people, Duchess. The Republic can't afford a neutral Mandalore that can later join the Separatists. When our official negotiations are over, Mandalore will either be our ally or removed as a potential threat. I'm sure that my cis counterpart had already shared similar sentiments and he does support the Death Watch. Is this how the Republic conducts itself nowadays? Blackmailing neutral nations? She sounded appalled. I have no doubt that she held a rather idealistic view of the Republic, one that didn't have much in common with reality even before the war. In the last year the galaxy changed, Duchess Satine. The Republic is fighting for its very survival against a monstrous enemy. We can no longer afford to be the nice guys. I did tell you that we'll be discussing realpolitik, didn't I? You have a choice to make, Duchess. Us or the Separatists. I shrugged. Next to me, I could feel anger coiling around Obi-Wan and most of it was targeted at me. At this moment, I can't ally Mandalore with the Republic. It's a political impossibility that won't be supported by neither the new Mandalorians, the Death Watch nor the minor political powers. That's too bad. Then the best thing you can expect is a civil war in which both the Republic and the Separatists will intervene. Vale, enough with this charade. Obi-Wan hissed. I know you well enough to see that you didn't come here just to antagonize the Duchess. Really? Well, she's everything I find wrong with this new Mandalore, though you're correct. I'm not doing it just for fun. Delcatur, Kenobi snapped. What? Unless your girlfriend is an idiot, she knows what has to happen. However, it will be a political suicide for her in particular and a death blow for her precious new Mandalorians. Obi-Wan looked between me and Satine, then sighed. I know where that's going. The three Mandalorians looked at each other. The advisor gave Satine a subtle nod and the Prime Minister simply stared at her. We've already discussed it, Alamek stated. The warriors, Satine spat the word, would never accept overtures from me. Most of them are too busy gathering behind the Death Watch. With that attitude? Of course not. Then you know what your people need. A new Mandalore will be a disaster, Satine snapped. Besides, no one can become such without the mask, which is lost. Most of the warriors you dismiss, who apparently make a major part of your population, see the Death Watch as their only viable alternative, a bunch of thugs of all things. If Mandalore is to avoid a civil war, they need another figure and a cause to rally behind. What do you propose, General Vale? The Prime Minister asked. They won't support the Duchess, nor a Republic general. No. There has been too much bad blood. We need to talk with the warriors who are still neutral, with the clan heads who haven't yet thrown their power behind the Death Watch, with any fractions that might exist within the later and find a viable alternative. Is that your plan, to turn my people back into bloodthirsty savages? What happens if this plan of yours fail? Satine glared at me. Mandalore burns. I deadpanned. If your people continue flocking to the Death Watch, they will become a bunch of murderous savages. That organization is nothing more than thugs that glorify a misunderstood past, and you made it the only viable alternative for most warriors among your people. I glared back at the woman. Damn, I didn't think that I would meet someone who was more irritating than Padme. You've given me a lot to think about, Sith. She spat the last word. This meeting is over. Prime Minister Alamek will ensure that you'll reach the Republic Embassy without accident. Master Kenobi, if you will, may we talk? Satine gave me a pointed look, privately. Sure. Lead the way, Duchess. Obi-Wan sent me a look promising retribution and followed Satine, who had turned around and headed towards a small door near the throne. This could have gotten better, Helena sighed. Not really. A few months ago, sure. Right now, the Duchess has little real power and no alternative that won't destroy her support base. She really isn't who we need to talk with. Your mysterious contacts on Mandalore? Among other people. First we need to have a chat with the ambassador and get briefed on the latest developments. Politics, Mando style. =RK=. Part 7. Ambassador's Office. Republic Embassy. Mandalore. What do you mean the ambassador was? Griffin recalled. I glared at the ranking Republic diplomat left in the embassy, a dark blue Twi'lek counselor. The young man recoiled from my anger and waved his hands in placating gesture. Ambassador Nellies was ordered back to Coruscant shortly before you arrived, General. I believe that she departed about the same time your ships exited hyperspace. This was a sweet little curfew from Palpatine. I'm sure of it as much. I was sure that he would be placing the blame on someone who's been a thorn in his side within the Republic diplomatic corps. This is bold. Who exactly did you piss off at Coruscant? Helena asked. More than a few people, I'm sure, I sighed. Palpy was getting more and more irritating lately. I might even have to move against him before everything was in place and the war would be all but won. At any rate, that was a few years down the line. I didn't have neither the assets nor the alliances needed to openly attack the Chancellor. I closed my eyes for a moment and ignored the Council, who was busy making excuses. My plans for Mandalore were rather simple: ensure that Bo-Katan became the new Mandalore, though to pull that off would be a challenge. She simply lacked enough glory and backing to credibly try gaining the position at this time. That's why I planned to gather a significant amount of warriors and clan heads behind the ideals of the honorable warriors of old, like Mandalore the Vindicated and his successor, my friend Stephen Ordo. He was one of the best men I ever knew and would be turning in his grave at seeing what had happened with his people. After that I was going to propose that they unleash their warriors to participate in the war until there was someone who proved to be a Mandalore material and could credibly hold the position. If I continued being sabotaged from Coruscant, I might not have a choice but be forced to deal with the Mandalorians once and for all, and that would be a crippling waste. Further, it would be spitting on Ordo's grave and all the times he saved my life. Last time I checked he actually was ahead. I smiled wishfully. A wave of fury almost overwhelmed me as I thought about all I lost. Everyone I once called a friend had been dead long enough to be nothing more but dust. What the criff I was doing fighting for the Republic? They weren't my people. They and the Empire were gone for millennia. All I had left was a hope to go home to a world and dimension away, to a woman I loved a few lifetimes ago. If I was allowed to. I still remember dying when that superweapon misfired. I clearly remember awakening in my fighter in a system far, far away in a future I barely knew. I remember struggling with memories old and new. Yet, what could I do? What was left? Why did I fight? The faces of Shark T, Obi-Wan, Arya, Bo-Katan and many more flashed before my eyes. People I considered my friends. Others, who won my respect. The soldiers under my command, who looked up to me to get them through the hell that was this war. The woman I might be slowly falling for and another that I found fascinating. In truth, they were the reason I fought. The only thing I really had in this time and place. As for Natal and Earth, I hoped that one day I would be back. That I would change the fate I knew awaited them. However, I've changed. Once I would have sacrificed the whole galaxy for that goal without a thought. Then I met Veta and later Ashara along with a lot of people I considered friends and comrades. By the time I fell in love with my late wife, I knew that I would no longer sacrifice everyone here for Nat and Earth. Now, all those years later, I found myself in a similar position. This wasn't a playground or a simple task to be completed. Criffit, I wasn't going to let Stefan's people, no matter how much they had lost their way, burn for the mistakes of a few idiots. It was time to cut some corners and go for a more radical plan. Enough, I snapped. I need your best information about the current clan leaders. Coordinate with the intelligence chief, he better be here. Half an hour. I also need a secure room to place a call from. A couple of minutes later, we were in the basement, where the local intel station comm equipment was based. It was the best I was going to get short of getting up to the Chimera. A few short orders later and I was alone in front of a heavily encrypted holo communicator. Soon enough my call came through and a few minutes later, Shark T as well as the other people I had requested were online. While I waited, I cursed the way I lost my composure earlier. It's been a long time since my past before ending in this galaxy bothered me too much. Not to mention the way I've been suppressing what I felt about being catapulted in the future and losing everything. Hey. At least this war was a great distraction and a good way to suppress my grief while I concentrated on commanding and fighting. Besides, a proper Sith would have simply shrugged and started looking for a way to increase his power. In the end, I did the same, just for different reasons. I smiled. Perhaps a pissed-off Sith is exactly what the Doctor prescribed to the Mandalorians. A few seconds after the Shark T's holographic image appeared. She looked delicious in the light robes she wore. A moment later 3 men stepped into view too, the Mandalorians whose presence I had ordered. Their obvious leader was a short but bulky brown-haired man, who looked to be in his early 30s. He was flanked by another man with a bit longer and lighter brown hair. He wore a light grey Mandalorian-styled armor with a symbol of combat medic. The last Mandalorian wearing such a badge I met was Mako, the future wife of Mandalore the Dauntless. The last man was almost shaved bald but I could see a crop of very short black hair. He was the tallest of the 3, though he was athletic instead of being a mountain of muscle. His black armor stood out among the lighter garb of the other people around him. General Vale, this is a surprise. I gather that this isn't a social call. T gave me a small smile when she saw me, but otherwise didn't show nothing but a professional interest. Unfortunately not. The situation here has taken a turn for the worse. General Cal Skirta, Magilla Ma, and Wallen Vor, I presume? Correct, General Vale. I'm Skirta. What's the problem? The Mandalorian warrior was wary. After all, it wasn't every day that the next best thing to your commander-in-chief called out of the blue, especially if you haven't had any contact with them previously. It seldom boded well too. Barring a miracle, Mandalore is going to be a smoking ball of glass in a couple of weeks, I stated flatly. That got their undivided attention. How well have you kept with news from home? I asked them before they could recover from the bomb I just dropped. Only the man in black armor didn't react. The combat medic gave me a flat look that promised pain and death, while the general simply stared at me. Vale, what did you do this time? Shark T sounded exasperated. Me? I simply had an informal meeting with Duchess Satine. She and the new Mandalorians are finished. Warriors are joining the Criffing Death Watch in droves and the latter imbeciles are going to either win control over Mandalore and join the Sis or launch a coup if they can't take power in a more traditional way. I see. Shark T sighed. I know what you would do in such a case. You know me so well, I teased, earning myself a glare. I need an explanation. Now. Skirta spoke quietly in a voice that broke no argument. That's curious. Besides my clone troopers, you're the second Mandalorian in this day and age I met who actually has a spine. I'm glad that Mandalore the Dauntless still has a few of his people left who are worth something. I gave the Mandalorian a cold smile. The Mandalorian general narrowed his eyes at me. I've heard a lot of rumors about you. That you're a delusional dark Jedi. A Sith who decided that hiding was no longer necessary. Even a few claiming that you fought in the Great Galactic War nearly 4,000 years ago. At Coruscant, Ryloth and Geonosis you proved you know what you were doing. You earned yourself a lot of glory. Skirta gave me a sharp nod of respect at that. Still. A true Sith after all those years and one allied with the Jedi and the Republic? That's hard to believe. We all play the cards we've been dealt. I was part of the Empire once, until a superweapon misfired and threw me millennia into the future. My people are gone, all I could do in their honor now is to hunt down and dispose of the fallen Jedi Dooku who pretends to be a Sith and sullies our name. But we aren't here to discuss my past or people, but Mandalore's future. I'm still waiting for an explanation. Skirta raised his ordered. Your people are leaderless. The only banner the warriors could gather around is that of the Death Watch. I paused and stared at each man in turn. You've been gathered here by Fett, so I hope that you and your friends on Kamino do believe in the creed of the true Mandalorians. Unless Mandalore unites behind someone honorable, its days are numbered. I can't allow your world to join the Separatists. If the Death Watch start a coup or takes power, Republic forces under my command will interfere and neutralize the threat once and for all." Scarter looked at Shark T, who stared at him for a moment and then gave him a firm nod. "I know what a Sith would do in such a case. I did pay attention during my history lessons." The Mandalorian warrior spoke in a voice that sounded calm. If it wasn't for the Force, it would be almost impossible to sense the emotion in his words. There were anger and apprehension, mixed in with fear. "You called us for a reason. I would prefer to have your people as my allies once again. The last thing I want is to be the man responsible for destroying Mandalore and breaking the Mandalorians. That's a fate that I want to prevent. I owe that much and more to Stephen Ordo. I called you to ask for help. Help me save your people and bring them up to the standards of honor that Mandalore the Vindicated and Mandalore the Dauntless were famous for. What say you, Cal Scarter, clan leader of Clan Scarter?" I asked aloud. == Part 8. Republic Intelligence Center, Republic Embassy, Mandalore. For nearly a minute I had a staring match with the Mandalorians. "What do you intend to do, General Vale? We've been practically ghosts for more than a decade. Our standing at home will be less than impressive after all that time," Scarter stated. "For starters, I need to talk with the most important clan leaders, something I believe you can facilitate. I still have a few contacts left. It should be doable. The honor and glory you earned yourself will help in that regard," the Mandalorian general said. "Second, the Death Watch are nothing but a bunch of glorified thugs and gangsters. Most of their acts were attacks against other Mandalorians. They need to be exposed for all to see what their misguided ideas really mean." I agree. They betrayed everything a true Mandalorian stands for once. There's no reason to believe they won't do that again. Scarter's voice became frosty. He obviously meant what the Death Watch did during the Civil War, something that as far as I knew wasn't a public knowledge. If it was and they still had such a large support as reported, the Mandalorians were truly lost. It's a wonder what one might find in the Jedi archives. I ran in a few interesting pieces of trivia while I was catching up on history. I smiled coldly. Checking up what happened with the Mandalorians had been high on my priority list after I saw the outcome of the Great War. Criff, the bastards who tore the Empire apart after the Republic fleets were all but destroyed and the war was for all intents and purposes won. Scarter froze. "You have proof about their treachery?" "I do. However, considering that it comes from the Jedi archives, it's not exactly credible. It's better than what we have. However, it's been a long time. Fett killed the bastard who engineered the betrayal. The proof is worth less today than it would have been a decade ago. What else? We provoke the Death Watch, make them show their true colors. Then we challenge their leaders to a single combat and deal with them. A dangerous gamble, worthy of a Mandalorian." Scarter nodded. I obviously earned myself a notch of approval in his eyes. The big problem's that we currently don't have an unifying figure. No one with a sufficient claim to become Mandalore anyway. That's a big concern. My initial plan was to keep the situation from exploding for long enough that someone could spread their wings and cover themselves in glory during the war. That's no longer a viable plan. What then? Discredit the Death Watch and hope for the best? Do it and improvise. The alternative is that Mandalore burns. What else do you want from us? Gather as many commandos and Mandalorians you can find on Camino, then make your way here ASAP. We need to talk in person anyway. We'll leave on the first available transport. Make sure that's well armed. I gave a nod to Shark T and cut the connection. Then I sent an encrypted burst transmission to Bo-Katan. == Brox's Bar, Sundari, Mandalore. After a few hours of who's who in today's clans, I let Helena to get more in-depth information and left the embassy. As far as I knew, Obi-Wan was still trying to smooth over things with his girlfriend. That thought made me smirk. If the woman didn't have her head stuck as deep in her ass as she did and if Kenobi wasn't still too clingy to the Jedi dogma, my Mandalore problem might be resolved. Obi-Wan certainly was covered with enough honor and glory to qualify for the position and hooking up with Satine would come with him becoming a part of the Mando culture. That was an interesting idea worth exploring. It took me about an hour to reach my destination, which was an address that Bo sent me while I was busy with the intel chief. The place made me smile. It also brought a bout of nostalgia. It was a bar, just like Stephen would have chosen for clandestine, or well any meeting in which he might have got away with it. For the Mandalorians, bars were practically a cultural thing, a places to watch some sport, get a drink and something to eat, make a deal and chill off by a way of a nice bar fight. The places shouldn't be mistaken with cantinas. First, everyone was much more polite, a result of everyone inside usually being trained and armed killer. Second, in any reputable Mando bar you couldn't find some usual things about cantinas the galaxy over: drugs, prostitutes and cut purses. 2 of those were pure suicide to try, and the last was going to get you thrown out. Outside the place wasn't anything to write home about, just a sturdy-looking door with a sign above. The interior was much better and brought a lot of nostalgia. There were a lot of tables, with a reasonably large place reserved for dancing in the center. The bar was on the right. It was a slab of dark metal that looked suspiciously like a polished piece of starship hull. It was lined up with sturdy tall chairs which looked strong enough to easily hold a big guy clad in heavy armor. Good thing too, because I could see 5 warriors at the bar busy either sipping their drinks or watching a big screen covering most of the wall to the left. Half the tables were filled with dining people, some were obviously couples, others looked like squads of warriors out for dinner. The remaining 2 walls were lined up with leather seats surrounding low tables and were submerged into shadows. Above them, I could see a few dozens trophies. All were dangerous predators. The crown pieces were a Rancor's head and much more impressive, a Tarantate one. I've dealt with a few of the latter back in the day. They were big brutes, heavily armored, fast, vicious and almost completely immune to the Force. In fact, a handful even fed on it when I tried to attack them that way. I shook my head and enhanced my perception with the Force. The familiar feeling of Bo-Katan immediately stood out. I smiled and headed to the corner seat to my left. A moment later, I enhanced my eyes and could clearly see her despite the shadows doing great job of concealing her. Bo-Katan was wearing armor similar to what she had back on Ryloth, though she was painted in the Death Watch preferred colors. I hoped that she was going to make the right decision. I would hate to have to kill her,